a lot of the focus in the startup tends to be the outputs, which is like, it's especially in today's world, which is how much funds you raise, like how big is your revenue growth, how many users you have. But actually, when you are setting up a startup or company, really what you should think about is really the inputs, which is, do you have good processes to hire good people, retain them, motivate them? Are you thinking hard about the structure of the company? Are you designing an organization? And boring things like OKRs and so on, right? The performance review system. So a lot more focus on what goes into sort of what building the organization, what your organization stands for, and so on. And then, of course, the results matter, but rather than focusing on the outcome there, think hard about the inputs to set yourself up for long-term success.
Welcome to the MHV podcast. We speak with leading founders, VCs, and operators on their journey in Southeast Asia. Learn more at www.monkshill.com. Hi, JJ. Really excited to have you on the MHV podcast. You are such an experienced operator and founder, and we're excited to be backing a founder like you across Southeast Asia. So I'd love to have you introduce yourself for everyone out there.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeremy. So I'm JJ Chai, CEO and co-founder of Rainforest. A bit about my background. Prior to starting Rainforest, about 10 years back, probably when most notable, after a short stint in tech and then a slightly longer stint in consulting at McKinsey, joined Airbnb to launch Airbnb in the region, Southeast Asia, 9 years back when no one knew what alternative travel was or homestays were. And after that, joined the team folks at Carousell about 5 years back to help scale that up over 4 years from a Singapore-focused classifieds app to a regional classifieds leader. Spent a year at X to 10X advising founders with the Flipkart alums based out of Bangalore for a while, and then started Rainforest a year plus ago.
Awesome. And so, we're both former consultants. I was at Bain, you're at McKinsey, but of course you're way more legit. You actually climbed all the way from an associate all the way to engagement manager.
Yeah, went a bit longer.
Yeah, and to a junior partner, right? And so you actually went there, you were a consultant, and there you were with that track, right? And so what made you say, hey, as a junior partner, I want to go into Airbnb, I want to go into tech? So what was that transition?
Yeah, I think like tech was always the starting point for me, which was that my first career out of school was tech. I'm trained as a software engineer. I wrote code in my early days of my career. Always wanted to get back to that post MBA and doing some understanding on the business side of things, right? My early experience was in engineering was that, it's sort of, if you're stuck within the engineering world and people make the wrong decisions around the, where to apply technology, it's a complete waste of your time. So you are coding stuff that doesn't quite make sense, right? So that was why I did my MBA, went on to do McKinsey, get a sort of big picture of things, and always wanted to come back to a world where you can apply technology where it's, has the most impact. And when the Airbnb idea came out, was a great one to sort of take something that's already working in the US and Europe and convince Asians that like you can actually travel and stay in someone's home and also rent out your home in a different way was an exciting prospect for me. And it was a good way to also just move out from sort of advising to actually be in the hot seat and take up a responsibility either way.
What was it like to be going back into tech after, effectively 6 years away as an advisor and then going back into tech? How was that like for you?
I think it was not too different. I mean, it was also a different type of tech, right? So it was much more on the business side, no longer writing PRDs and stuff like that. But having that understanding of how it works on the back end, it's always been helpful throughout tech, throughout my career, even though it's on the business side of things. So no big changes. I think what what was sort of most striking was just the lack of infrastructure to support you in a sort of professional services environment. You have tons of support, everything from executive assistants to people to help you draw slides to and stuff like that. You just got to get used to figure out tools, software, technology to make your work easier rather than having a boatload of people behind in the back office to support you.
Yeah, and there you are, of course, scaling, Airbnb across APAC as the managing director, right, for Southeast Asia and India, and we know how huge it has become as a global business as well as Southeast Asia business. One interesting thing that a lot of people ask, both founders and operators, is there are so many American companies that are looking for general managers and regional managers, right? What differentiates between a good company to be a GM or managing director for versus one that's not so good for? Any reflections from your experience working at Airbnb?
From choosing the company or choosing the GM? Which side?
I guess maybe both, right? Because if you choose the right company, you can be a good GM for them, and I guess the right GM helps the company be successful for the region as well, right?
Yeah, I would say some things are hard to sort of fully plan out. There's two different things. My belief is always sort of like the person and role fit to the role, right? And in this specific case, they were looking for someone who had actually spent time in all of Southeast Asia, understood the different cultures, could have had the network in whether Philippines or Thailand, Indonesia, and so on, where I had again, by chance, had spent at least a year working with clients in these markets, had a network of people, had done consumer work, understood everything from how people did prepaid phones to sort of very different infrastructures in each of these markets. And that was the sort of like key point for Airbnb, which is that like in every one of these markets in Southeast Asia, it is a different landscape, and having the connections to get started in there was helpful. So that's a bit of the sort of where the fit came in. How much do I know about travel? Very little at that point in time, right? So that's where the organization needs to take a bet around. Okay, this guy knows something about consumers in each of these markets, but not so much in travel. Can understand the tech side of things. So this guy would not sort of be surprised that like the tech team back in SF won't be able to sort of overnight flip up new payment methods, kind of thing, right? So I think it's about that kind of fit. From a sort of choosing an organization perspective, honestly, at any point in time, there's always all these organizations coming across to Southeast Asia to set up. They're looking for a GM and a leader. I think the key question is like, what do you want from a career perspective? What do you want out of it? Which is, there are a lot of organizations now that are sort of set up in Southeast Asia at a very late stage. And that's the typical setup, which is execute to something that's sort of decided in some HQ somewhere, right? The nice part about Airbnb at that point in time was it was sort of free play. There was already a very broad mandate. Grow. We have competitors. We have sort of copycats. We are behind, right? Your only mandate is sort of like get back leadership on the back of a global platform. We have no playbook for you, right? Like go figure out. So that was the interesting part for me. So there's sort of different types of preferences in there.
Amazing. And there you are with that no playbook, right? And you were the first employee in Southeast Asia. Any interesting war stories you have in figuring out Southeast Asia?
We had some amount of playbook from European counterparts and US counterparts around how to set up each of this. I think the biggest thing that we sort of learned back then was just to sort of focus on the right level of granularity. We sort of started off we needed to sort of get everyone to use Airbnb, or particularly on the hosting side, right, across Southeast Asia. But actually you quickly sort of double click that and actually you figure out the first few areas that you need to solve are really around where there is already latent demand or you sort of can see the demand. So where the searches are, it was Bali, it was Phuket, it was vacation rental locations across the whole region. And while actually those were, there was sort of relatively good supply in some of those places, the quality wasn't there and there's sort of not enough sort of understanding of how to use Airbnb. So a lot of efforts was actually, in the early days, was quite simple around focusing on these few wins and learning to also let some of the other lower priority cities or destinations suffer a little bit, but focus on a few wins first and then sort of build up the rest, right? So it was really that piece, and also being clear about like what worked well from an Airbnb perspective, right? Because there were sort of local competitors that were doing things differently. They were sort of building up in cities a lot more or doing things slightly differently, but not focusing too much on that and focusing on actually what our users on Airbnb want. The people in Europe, in US, they were searching for these things and solving from that and then growing out of there rather than being too fixated at what the other players were doing.
And there you decided to join, Carousell, right? And become a VP, SVP for growth and strategy over, 4 years. Could you tell and share more about that story to join Carousell and what that was like?
Oh, Carousell was a great story. I had met them very early on as part of during my Airbnb days. We had common parent investors, and so they were sort of asking about community building and so on. My first impression was that, like, hey, this is a solved problem. My generation solved this with this app called or a website called eBay. So I was trying to understand what exactly changed here, but quickly realized after using it myself that, like, okay, the sort of web to mobile thing, obviously now on hindsight is super obvious, but changed everything around how you interact and what was available for you to buy and sell. So having met them a year later on, they sort of raised the Series B and needed to expand regionally as well as sort of figure out the revenue generating business model behind the app. There are lots of users, but sort of still pre-revenue. And so I took on the opportunity. I had enough late night calls to sort of US time zones, and at that point in time, Airbnb was a lot larger and a lot more centralized. So decisions started becoming made out of HQ, which is the right thing to do in a global travel platform. So wanted a new adventure, and this one was a great one. The backstory for Carousell is always that you've heard these stories around parents scolding their kids for becoming an entrepreneur, and when I heard about this from them, I was like quite determined to sort of help make it a success so that future kids don't get scolded, right? Like for me, the main thing was, how do we sort of spend some time here so that future generations can sort of graduates or even dropouts can just start a company and not get scolded by their parents. I think that's really one of the sort of underlying motivations as well. So it was a fun journey joining them. Tough, I would say. A very different setup than sort of Airbnb and the market size in the US and so on to buffer a lot of things. Growing out of Singapore is always a bit of a tricky piece. So being great for users in Singapore market and then growing to the rest of Southeast Asia, it's always a bit trickier given the differences from here, and then you go to Indonesia, is completely different.
Yeah, amazing. When you say tricky, for those, obviously going to ask that question when they hear you say tricky. What's one piece of advice for people who are growing out of Singapore? What's one thing you've learned about growing out of Singapore, whatever that phrase means to you?
So I have even in my own personal angel investing thing, I try very, very much to sort of discourage founders who are trying to build for Singapore first. It's a very small market in the global scheme of things. And even if you crack it, Singaporeans love your product, it's very hard to sort of make that work in the next market because the density, the income levels, the kind of phones that you use, everything changes by a drastic amount. This is not transplanting from SF to Texas, Austin in the US. This is a completely different thing. So I think the starting point is, to the extent you can start regional or even better, start global, do it. Obviously, there's advantages to start in Singapore for certain categories, particularly those sort of new energy, water, and stuff like that. But for software, my preference is that you start regional or start global rather than just a Singapore solution.
Awesome. Well, that's a great set of learnings for knowledge that you just dropped there. And then there, you've quickly went on to go to X to 10X to help startups in Southeast Asia scale up. What were some of the key learnings and advice that you were giving out to help people scale up for that phase?
Well, I found myself learning a lot from the X to 10X team, right? So they had scaled up Flipkart, full decacorn, and not just that, right? They were sort of very deliberate about what were the sort of ingredients in the scaling journey that they themselves, on hindsight, look back and thought should have been implemented at Flipkart early on. And the way they put it was these are the things that if we had known, right, would have been very different. Would have been a very different battle with Amazon in India. Yeah, and when I reflected on those learnings was also very true for the scale-up journey at Carousell and to some extent at Airbnb as well, which is a lot of the focus in the startup tends to be the outputs, which is like, it's especially in today's world, which is how much funds you raise, like how big is your revenue growth, how many users you have. But actually, when you are setting up a startup or company, really what you should think about is really the inputs, which is, do you have good processes to hire good people, retain them, motivate them? Are you thinking hard about the structure of the company? Are you designing an organization? And boring things like OKRs and so on, right? The performance review system. So a lot more focus on what goes into sort of what building the organization, what your organization stands for, and so on. And then of course the results matter, but rather than focusing on the outcome there, think hard about the inputs to set yourself up for long-term success.
Amazing. And after all this experience in executive in multiple, now name brand startups, you've decided to become a founder. So why, after all this time, you decided, I want to found in the e-commerce space, helping e-commerce entrepreneurs fulfill their brand's potential? So why now become a founder?
Yeah, I think, in every step of how I sort of done things, I found that the risk reward profile for taking more risk has been either by luck or not, right? Has been sort of beneficial to me. And my thinking has been that like the perceived risk of taking like high risk sometimes is sort of not real, right? So and what more high risk than sort of starting everything from scratch. And to sort of mitigate that, of course, I had to sort of wait for an idea and something that I could actually be well suited for. And when this idea came around, the idea of sort of taking something that's already working, it's a brand that someone has actually created, there's users behind it, and then scaling it up appealed to me. This was, again, very, very similar to what I had done in Carousell to some extent and to Airbnb to some extent, proven in some form, and then sort of scaling it up. And the other piece was really around whether I had the belief around the why now. Why now for this particular model? And when I looked around, and this was in the midst of COVID already, everyone was, at least to me, felt like a lot of people could create their own brands. Everything from as simple as sort of an Instagram shop selling cookies because it's locked down and nothing else to do, you bake, and then you don't want to bake for yourself, you bake for everyone, to sort of ordering small batches of products from China and then selling on Instagram or on e-commerce sites was real. Like the cost and the barriers to actually create your own brand has completely changed, and therefore creating this sort of explosion of micro brands. But all of them also having the same problem, which is not everyone becomes the next Warby Parker or Allbirds brand. Some of them get stuck. Some of them don't really want to hire people or sort of build a company around it and need an exit. So that was sort of the why now. The why me piece was always around sort of seen some of this scaling up before and was super interesting. And then the third piece personally was thinking about how do I sort of ratchet up risk one more level. I'm going from big co to global consulting firms to sort of emerging startups, well funded, to smaller funded startups, to now, what's the most, you take it most extreme, what's the most risky way you can do it, setting up yourself and get going.
I love you kind of being very clear about your personal framework, about your personal founder dash problem fit, and being comfortable with that risk on one side. And also I think, like you said, the fact that you actually are a perfect fit for helping, e-commerce brands and solopreneurs also build out what they want to build as well. So, one thing that we talked about before was, that you've learned a lot from speaking with hundreds of them, right, over the years in terms of what they want and what they want to build. So could you share a little bit more about those insights that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, in speaking to all these sort of micro entrepreneurs setting up their brands, what I've found is that like the extreme breadth of it, right? My initial thinking was these are hardcore sort of hustlers, right? Which is people who sort of, I'm going to sort of create a business. In the same way you sort of think about sort of traditional businesses, people who sort of sell things and so on. But you actually see a very big variety, everything from sort of housewives who had extra time and then they said like, hey, I'm going to sort of create this kitchen product. And suddenly they started selling $1 million of it a year, all the way down to sort of side gigs, people who are working in large organizations, right? Literally Facebook, Google, FANG type companies, and doing something on the side. Again, building up $1 million of sales on the side there. So the variety of type of entrepreneurs was staggering, right? So all shapes and sizes, ages, and so on. I even spoke to one 82-year-old grandmom who did a stationery brand. She was selling high-end premium stationery online, which was amazing. So for me, that was one staggering piece, which is, it's really sort of really quite flat in the sense that anyone can actually come and try. Second piece of it was really around the fact that it was actually so easy, as in, so not easy to sort of be successful, but so easy to get started, right? So there are different levels of it, and the sort of biggest hurdle was always the sort of nudge, right? Like, why do you start? It's always one of the questions I asked. Everything from sort of, I had a lot of time, to sort of like, I had this problem, I couldn't find it on Amazon, I couldn't find it online for this specific problem. And then just the impetus from that to sort of taking the first step, which is to make that first order of product and try it out. So it gets everything going from there. Yeah, and then the third piece is that the problems at the sort of small scale level of sort of SME entrepreneurs or solopreneurs is real, which is there's actually very little, things are changing now, but there's actually very little avenues for finding working capital to sort of scale up the business, very little resources, and not easy to sort of find good people. When you're sort of a solo entrepreneur, trying to hire someone is, like we talk about career stability and next steps. When working for a solo entrepreneur, it's hard to find that and see that. So one of the biggest things they struggle with is, I tried scaling my company. I hired these 2 people, but before long they move on to other things. I can't build up on it, right? So that scaling up issue is real as well for these solo entrepreneurs, and they tend to sort of like the 0 to 1, starting something new aspect of it.
Amazing. And one interesting aspect of course is that you are providing that aspect of like mid-size exits, right? That level of opportunity and upside for them as well, on top of these conversations in terms of that pathways as well. Could you share a little bit more about what that process looks like from their side?
Yeah. So there's just two different general groups, right? Those who very clearly want to exit their business, which is the idea of decided, I've done 6 years of this. I actually don't want to live my life doing, kitchen lemon squeezers or kitchen products. This is done. I want to move on to my next passion products, or some change in life circumstances that makes them want to exit. In these kind of situations, they sort of would look for different exit opportunities across globally, actually, especially if you're doing a cross-border e-commerce brand. And then they'll come to us and ask for a valuation around their business. So from the valuation stage, if they agree to sort of the valuation stage, we need about 48 hours or so with a certain amount of information. We give them an indicative valuation, and then we go into 30 to 45 days due diligence to make sure everything is as expected. After which we sort of sign an agreement to transfer the assets to us, and we do the transaction from there. And the payout is everything from some amount of upfront payout, some amount of earnouts over the next 2 years, as well as we grow the brand and run the brand in there. And then I talk about the second group. The second group are those who are not really motivated to sell yet. Usually those conversations are typically around setting up for understanding the process, just getting to know things very simply, and then starting the early conversations around like, hey, what will you do if I'll take over our brand? Like, what does it mean? And in those conversations, we tend to be just helpful in general to the business. There's no acquisitions, there's no deal structuring. We talk about what we know about cross borders, and we're happy to share in those situations.
Amazing. I think you're really giving people just the option, right? Because they can always continue working on their own brand themselves, or the option to work with you, right? And Rainforest to get options.
Yeah, and remember, my thing around entrepreneurs is like, my belief is like, it should be a path that's normalized a lot more. It's gotten a long way, right? In any form, right? You don't have to create the next Carousell, right? You're creating a small business. It should be a normal form. And I would love these guys to go and raise venture capital or make it $1 billion business. So if that's the default path, please do go ahead, and we can, where we can be helpful, we want to be helpful, right? The exit is just an additional option for them, and by no means am I out there to try to sort of convince everyone to sell their business to us. That's not the thing. We like to sort of play a role such that, like, if you set up your own business, just know that, like, we're here in the e-commerce world. There's some exit option for you.
And one thing, obviously, with all of your experience as well, is that you've also been able to do all of that. And what is the macro trends, I think, powering all of this from your perspective? Is it like e-commerce is going up in Southeast Asia? Is it cross-border? What is it that really is, fueling, you think, this from the super cycle or trend from your side?
Yeah, I mean, the analogy I always talk about is the sort of like App Store analogy, right? In the past, to do software and distribute software, you needed to be Microsoft. You needed to get your software into boxes, print CDs, and you need distribution, big time distribution into shops to sort of people to buy it. So the scale at which you need to do this is much larger. In the same way today, right? Like, what's lowered the barriers of it for this is, you have everything on the marketing side of things. With $10 of marketing, you can exactly target someone to sort of buy your product. Also talk about your product. You don't even need to pay for it. You can earn sort of like a distribution online. The supply chain side of things has changed a lot. It used to be very much larger quantities to order and manufacture products. You can now do this at a much smaller scale. Obviously, today's world, moving things around is a bit harder than it was just a year ago, but it's really much easier than 5-10 years ago in terms of moving goods around and finding someone to sort everything out, from production, inspection, quality, tariffs, everything. You can do it on sitting here in Singapore. You can do this cross-border. And then the third piece is that the consumer willingness to try new things is real, right? Which is, there used to be a time where people would just buy the standard brands, and you need some mega superstar, sports star to be on TV before you sort of, I trust this brand. It's changed. It's now your neighborhood or your sort of influencer that you follow, or your sort of fellow fitness guy on Instagram. So what builds trust and what builds a brand has changed as well. So the combination of these three things, of new channels to reach consumers, what creates trust and brand for the consumers, the willingness to try new things at a different scale, and the barriers to sort of create and make new products has totally changed, and the scale that we should do it has created this super cycle of micro brands, really. And there are some research that talks about how much of FMCG in the next 5 to 10 years will be captured by your big players versus the sort of emerging players. Most of the growth, actually almost all the growth, is actually coming from new brands, right, versus the incumbents.
Amazing. That's great insight, actually. Well, that means there's a lot of exciting growth that's going to be coming ahead. On that note, I think one interesting thing is that you've also kind of gone through this whole experience where you've been an executive watching founders fundraise, and now you're a founder who has recently gone through the fundraising process. And a common topic that founders have asked us to share is about fundraising. And so one thing that we've chosen to ask our founders to talk about is about your fundraising process at a high level, not in terms of the process, but like any advice that you have in terms of like, how did you go about thinking about it? What did you learn from that process? So any thoughts or reflections about that whole process from your perspective?
Yeah, very much so. I think, look, and I also speak from perspective of having sort of angel investor and talking to some of the founders I angel invest into, realizing that for myself, because I've been in the industry for so long, I have a bit more privilege around the fact that I know the network is there is some level of trust, so it is definitely easier on my end. But I started from the principle around who do I want as partners along the journey, right? So what kind of partners do I need along the journey? Obviously, there's the soft capital considerations and so on, but we have a short list around like what's the considerations around the partners to have on board. And very clearly, it was really around people who knew the space very much, right? We like to have people who've been operators before. Again, this is my own preference. This is also what I tell my angel investors, which is like, look, I'm an operator and a founder. I understand what it means to be in your shoes. I think that goes a long way. People will understand what it means to be in your shoes around. Not everything is a linear thing. It's sort of, there are going to be hiccups, and they'll, when push comes to shove, or when times are tough, they'll hunker down and help you sort of get through that versus sort of asking, okay, when do you solve it, kind of thing, right? Like it's always easy to be the board member that sort of points out, backseat and say like, yeah, that should be higher and you should do more, but what, right? Like so that's really the second piece. And then the third piece there is really the sort of signaling and reputation as well, right? Which is like there are funds or also investors out there who will just invest in anything out there, right? Like it's a very different strategy, right? So having the ones that sort of have a bit of reputation around being particular and sort of deliberate about their investments helps for the next round investments as well. So those are really the three things. And when it comes to Monk's Hill side of things, had met Koi long time back from my even during my Airbnb days. When I was at Airbnb as well, I also met Peng, right, where I had some discussions with him back then. So always known Monk's Hill as the operator-led or former founder-led fund, and that was really one of the big things that sort of got it high on our list for us.
And obviously, one of the interesting things you said is that's something that you advise other founders to think through. What would be the, I guess, contrary sentiment, I guess, or what would be the common sentiment to that? Because it sounds like you're contrasting yourself to that view. So what would the contrary view of that be? Yeah.
But the contrary one is sort of like, to chase valuations, right? I know it's sort of crazy, and you sort of, when a founder, you think about dilution here and there, or you don't think about dilution in the first round, and then when you go to the second round, you think it's actually quite dilutive. But my general principle is is to really think hard about like the 5-10 year horizon, right? And think of it as a multi-stage game to it, and that trying to be fixated in that round and that valuation is really the wrong game to play, right? Sort of take it as you play 3 steps forward. What do you need to set yourself up for the next 3 years and the next 3 fundraise, and being in the best position for it is the starting point. And when you sort of put yourself in that kind of mindset, maximizing valuation is in that round is typically not necessarily the best path. Yeah.
I think that's interesting, right? Because when you talk about that multi-stage over that thing, because my reflection as a founder who's also fundraised, seed, Series A, is that, the real enemy is not each other. It's really the 39 out of 40 chance of failure, right?
Exactly.
That's the VC and the founder has to really work together to minimize the chance of failure and to maximize the chances of success together. And that's where the growing the pie is. Versus if a VC just brings capital, then the problem is you maintain the odds of failure and the odds of success, which is not bad. I mean, you still maintain your ownership, but you didn't change the odds.
Yeah, I would go even further than that, right? Like my belief in the ecosystem in Southeast Asia is that it's so immature that actually another group of investors that actually not only sort of keep it stable, but actually decreases your odd because they are just bad board members, or sort of not distracts you from the actually executing, right? Like there's sort of 3 levels for me, sort of like adding value and sort of like helping solve problems and so on. Neutral, fine, there's capital. I think if you sort of do a poll, honest poll around like experienced founders across the region, there's also this category down there, which is like they sort of press you to optimize for valuations, help them with their markups on their sort of MOICs and so on to look good, not really thinking about the fundamentals of the business, which is, hey, you need to create good products for consumers, and that grows valuation, not playing the valuation game to mark up and look like a great investor. I think there is that group, and it still exists in this part of the world. Hopefully there's less of them over time.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth there. And I think one interesting aspect about that is, over time, well, my confidence actually is that, I think the system, as it matures, information asymmetry will drop over time. Reputational, tends to spread. Founders talk to each other, VCs talk to each other. Long game.
Yeah, it's a long game. So you can play the short game. Those that play the long game will benefit in a long run. And yes, I do believe that as well.
Yeah, just that the long game always takes a long time to happen, I think. So that's the frustrating thing for everybody, right? It's like,
there's always the quick wins, and then sort of harder. But I think staying on the long-term path will play out. It's just there is always that sort of more frustrating period at any one point in time.
Yeah, awesome. And on that note, I'd love to kind of paraphrase, I think, the 3 big themes that I got from this entire podcast, and to wrap things up here. The first, of course, thank you so much for sharing your learnings from, being a product manager in tech world to being a junior partner at McKinsey advising technology companies, to choosing to be, the first employee in Southeast Asia and the GM for Airbnb in Southeast Asia, to Carousell as an executive, to X to 10X, and just so many learnings and knowledge to just drop knowledge, just insight after insight at each stage. So I'm sure it must be very helpful to lots of people along the way. And then secondly, of course, we did a very quick set of discussions about why you chose to be a founder and helping partner and growing value for e-commerce brands in 2 aspects. I think the first, of course, about how and why now is the right time for you to choose to be a founder and bring all that you've learned to the field. And on the other side, of course, is that what you've learned from speaking to hundreds of e-commerce entrepreneurs and the opportunity to help give them the optionality, the liquidity, and the growth opportunity that you're able to bring with your own skills. So this amazing partnership that you have there. And lastly, thank you so much for also sharing your own experience as a founder and executive around, I think, the multi-stage VC selection, right? Being very picky, having high standards in terms of choosing the right VC to have on board, in terms of adding value and creating value for the company over multiple stages in the future, and fighting off the common enemy, which is the odds of failure / increasing the total actual value of the company over the next few years. And of course, our joint aspiration for the Southeast Asia ecosystem over the long term as well. So thank you so much, JJ, for coming on the MHV podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the MHV podcast, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues. Go to www.monkshill.com for more founders' journeys, company building advice, and insights into regional tech trends.